A Russian man claiming to hold top-level secrets about Russian advanced bombers has just turned up at the U.S. southern border, seeking asylum. The man claims to have been an engineer at a production facility over in the city of Kazan, and he says that he possesses top-secret information about the White Swan Tu-160, which is the most advanced bomber in the Russian arsenal. U.S. border officials, they interviewed the man, and they determined that his story was in fact credible and eventually passed him off to the FBI, who are still in the process of interrogating him right now. However, analysts have pointed out that the fact that the story was even leaked to the public is an indication that perhaps the American government is encouraging other Russians who also hold top-level secrets to also escape to America. And if you thought that was interesting, well then you should click on that button below this video and check out Epic TV, one of the best no-censorship video platforms on the internet.
Cybersecurity and infrastructure protection will come to order. The purpose of this hearing is to receive testimony from Jen Easterly, Director of Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, or CISA. I now recognize Ranking Member Swalwell for the purposes of seeking unanimous consent.
Thank you, Chairman. I ask unanimous consent that the gentlelady from New York, Ms. Clark, be permitted to participate in today's hearing.
Without objection, so ordered. I now recognize myself for an opening statement. Welcome back for our second subcommittee hearing of the Congress. Last month, we hosted industry leaders to give their perspective on the state of American cybersecurity, and particularly how the Cybersecurity Infrastructure Security Agency, or CISA, has developed since its creation 5 years ago. I'm glad that we will hear directly from CISA Director Jen Easterly and her views on CISA's evolution and where it needs to grow and mature by 2025. Director Easterly and I have had a fantastic working relationship since I started as ranking member of the subcommittee last Congress. I look forward to continuing our strong bipartisan relationship this Congress. In our last hearing, there were some common themes from our witnesses that I hope to further explore with Director Easterly this afternoon. First, we learned that CISA must work with the industry and interagency partners to ease the compliance burden that industry faces from duplicative regulation. It's clear that our nation must increase resilience to cyber risk across the board, particularly within our critical infrastructure sectors. But we must find the right balance between regulatory burden and improving security outcomes. We also heard a lot about one of CISA's newest initiatives, the Joint Cyber Defense Collaborative, or JCDC. We heard that JCDC has the potential to be a value add to the private sector, but additional transparency around its mission and processes would benefit both the JCDC and industry. Finally, and perhaps most foundationally, we heard about the need for a robust cybersecurity workforce. We need not only enough people, but the right people with the right skills in the right jobs. This is one of my top priorities this Congress, and I'm looking forward to hearing Director Easterly's perspective on how CISA can best contribute to the development of our national cyber workforce. This hearing is timely. It comes as we are evaluating the President's fiscal year 2024 budget request. CISA is requesting $3.1 billion, $145 million increase over fiscal year 2023 enacted, the fiscal 2023 enacted funding level. The dialogue we have during this hearing will help inform our committee's review of the budget, particularly the new program CISA proposes within, including the evolution of the National Cybersecurity Protection System. I think I speak for all members on this dais when I say that we want CISA to succeed. Its mission is too important to fail. It is our responsibility to ask pointed but productive questions about CISA's stewardship of the resources and authorities Congress has given it. As I said in our last hearing, Congress intends to be a partner to CISA to ensure the agency meets its full potential. Director Easterly, I look forward to your testimony today, and I thank you for being here. I now recognize the ranking member, the gentleman from California, Mr. Swalwell, for his opening statement.
Thank you, Chairman, and welcome, Director. It was just 12 hours ago that the Chairman and I were here early in the morning with our colleagues voting. I don't think we voted the same way on many of the amendments yesterday, but on this issue and your success, there is no daylight between the Chairman and I and my colleagues. Your success is America's success in this space, and that is something we are rooting for and want to enable. I also represent a East Bay, California district that is home to tech giants like TriNet and Workday, but also an emerging cybersecurity insurance company called Cowbell Cyber, and have worked with all of them to protect not just large companies, but small and medium-sized companies from emerging threats. As the chairman said, CISA is at an inflection point, and Congress made CISA an operational component of DHS 5 years ago. Since then, its budget has nearly doubled, and Congress has provided it with a range of new authorities, from mandatory cyber incident reporting to persistent threat hunting on federal networks to cyber sentry. And CISA has ambitiously taken on new responsibilities to meet the demands of an evolving threat landscape, building trusted relationships with new stakeholders in the process. For that, I and our team commend CISA for its proven ability to dynamically respond to evolving threats ranging from election security to open source software vulnerabilities to the Shields Up campaign. And as it relates to election security, I hope to hear an update from CISA on some recent successes. It has launched promising new initiatives, including the National Risk Management Center and the Joint Cyber Defense Collaborative, a collaboration that so many outside organizations, private sector folks are asking, how do we get in? How do we participate? Which to me means you are a victim of your own success in that regard, in that there's high interest in growing and expanding the ability to share information and collaborate to take on our threats. All of these are worthy efforts. I support them and am committed to their success. Today, I look forward to hearing how CISA will continue to deliberate in the new work it takes on and the commitments it makes to our partners. As more stakeholders become aware of CISA and its capacity, they have placed more and more demands on its resources. CISA cannot be, as you know, everything to everyone, and it certainly does not have the resources to boil the ocean. Becoming the powerhouse cybersecurity and critical infrastructure defense agency, CISA has the potential to be requires clear strategic direction and determined leadership. I have every confidence that Director Easterly has both, and I will be interested in learning more about your vision for CISA moving forward. I'm also interested, as I referenced, in the future of JCDC. Stakeholders have applauded JCDC as an innovative, flexible tool for CISA to gather and fuse threat information, foster real-time collaboration, and push out security practices through initiatives like its Shields Up campaign. Over the past year and a half, CISA has expanded JCDC's focus to include open source software security and protecting high-risk communities like journalistic or civil society organizations. Although these are worthwhile efforts, it's unclear what criteria JCDC is using to select which areas to focus on, which organizations to partner with, and not how these activities are tied to the JCPO's original purpose of streamlining cyber planning and operational collaboration. I look forward to candid conversations about defining JCDC's core functions, how to ensure JCDC partners are involved in decisions about its future, and how it can bring a more proactive posture to CISA's defense activities. Formalizing the answers to these questions through authorization will ensure JCDC has enduring value for years to come. On a related note, I understand that CISA is in the process of revamping the National Risk Management Center and look forward to learning more about plans to make it CISA's analytical hub. Finally, it's critically important that CISA do more to secure industrial control systems and other operational technology. I appreciate CISA's support for my legislation that we passed into law last year, the Industrial Control Systems Cybersecurity Training Act, which will solidify the existence of meaningful training courses to ensure OT remains at the forefront of our security focus. As I'm sure you will agree, CISA must develop that workforce now, not 5 years from now, while also doing more to promote threats, to understand threats to OC systems, push out its cyber performance goals, and grow programs like Cyber Sentry that monitor our OT threats. Thank you again to the chairman for convening us here today. Thank you, Director Easterly, and your team who's worked with us for your testimony, and I look forward to a robust conversation about attacking the threats that we face. I yield back.
Thank you, Ranking Member Swalwell. I do not see the chairman or the ranking member of the full committee, so other members of the committee are reminded that opening statements may be submitted for the record. I am pleased to have Director Easley before us today to discuss this very important topic. I ask that our witness please rise and raise their right hand. Director Easley, do you solemnly swear that the testimony you will give before the Committee on Homeland Security of the United States House of Representatives will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Let the record reflect that the witness has answered in the affirmative. Thank you. Please be seated. I would now like to formally introduce our witness, Jen Easterly. She's the Director of the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency at DHS. She was nominated by President Biden in April 2021 and unanimously confirmed by the Senate on July 12th, 2021. It's no easy feat. As Director Easterly leads CISA's effort to understand, manage, and reduce risk to the cyber and physical infrastructure Americans rely on every day. Before serving in her current role, she was the head of firm resilience at Morgan Stanley, responsible for ensuring preparedness and response to business-disrupting operational incidents and risks. Director Easterly also has a long tenure in public service, to include 2 tours at the White House. Director, thank you for being here today. I now recognize you for 5 minutes to summarize your opening statement.
Thank you so much, Chairman Garbarino, Ranking Member Swalwell, members of the subcommittee, for the opportunity to appear before you today. I'm really excited to share what we're doing to ensure that the CISA of today and of tomorrow is the agency that our nation deserves. As America's cyber defense agency, CISA leads the national effort to understand, manage, and reduce risk to the cyber and physical infrastructure that Americans rely on every day. Since CISA was established in 2018, the threats we face have become more complex, more geographically dispersed, and they affect the entire cyber ecosystem, from federal civilian government agencies to businesses large and small to state and local governments, and ultimately the American people. CISA's mission has never been more urgent, and it's a sense of urgency that each of us at CISA feels every day to ensure that we are making the best use of the resources and authorities that Congress has generously provided to us over the past several years, and demonstrating a clear return on investment to both you and to the American people. As you're well aware, the past 2 years have been pretty intense. From the SolarWinds supply chain compromise to the ransomware attack on Colonial Pipeline, from vulnerabilities exploited in Microsoft Exchange servers to vulnerabilities mitigated in Log4j software, from our Shields Up campaign to safeguard critical infrastructure from Russian malicious cyber activity, to efforts across the nation to help state and local election officials secure election infrastructure during the 2022 midterms. CISA, along with our partners, has been front and center in each. We've aggressively leveraged all of the authorities that we've been granted to enhance our operational visibility into federal civilian networks through persistent hunting, to conduct planning and operations with our industry partners, including our operational technology and industrial control system partners through the Joint Cyber Defense Collaborative, to identify vulnerable systems through our admin subpoena process and notify our partners to prevent them from being exploited, to serve as both a sector risk management agency for 8 sectors and 1 subsector, and more broadly as the national coordinator for critical infrastructure security and resilience, working with our sister SRMAs to reduce cross-sector risk. And even as we've maintained the highest operational tempo in an increasingly complex and demanding threat environment, we've been growing and maturing as a new agency, co-creating a culture of collaboration to enable us to attract and retain the best talent in the nation, and indeed growing that talented workforce by nearly 1,000 new teammates in the last couple years. Meticulously executing our rapidly expanding budget to ensure we remain responsible stewards of taxpayer dollars. And last September, we published our first ever strategic plan, which outlines our ambitious goals through 2025 across 4 key pillars: cyber defense, risk reduction and resilience, operational collaboration, and agency unification. I greatly appreciate this committee's steadfast work to help CISA achieve these goals, and also appreciate that the tenets outlined in the CISA 2025 plan, from optimizing the organization, growing an expert cyber workforce, enhancing operational visibility, advancing our capabilities, harnessing partnerships, and measuring outcomes to determine progress, are all well aligned. So our efforts together can advance a shared vision for cybersecurity in America. We're aggressively executing this plan, working with our trusted partners to enable a collective defense of our critical infrastructure, to include working with those target-rich, cyber-poor entities like small businesses and school districts and water facilities and hospitals and local election offices to ensure that they have the resources and tools they need to improve their cybersecurity and build resilience. Needless to say, there is much, much more to be done to protect and defend our nation's critical infrastructure, from driving adoption of secure by design principles in our technology products to championing corporate cyber responsibility in every boardroom to implementing a groundbreaking cyber incident reporting regime, and much more to be done to mature our great team and optimize our value to our partners, with perhaps no partner more fundamental to our success than you all. We would not be here today without tremendous bipartisan congressional support, especially from this committee and this subcommittee. We are very grateful for your commitment to ensuring that CISA is armed with the talent, the resources, and the authorities necessary to meet our mission of reducing risk to the critical infrastructure Americans rely on every day. This is truly a no-fail mission. And thanks to your support, we are thriving. And while we're proud of what we've accomplished to date, we recognize the criticality of continued support in terms of authorities and budget to ensure that we sustain this progress. We must and we will continue pushing hard under your oversight and with your support to strengthen this agency and, by extension, the security and resilience of our nation. Thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Director Easterly. Members will be recognized by order of seniority for their 5 minutes of questioning. An additional round of questioning may be called after all members have been recognized. Well, and I'm not going to call myself first because my vice chair has another hearing she has to go to, and I know she's got some very interesting questions. So I would like to yield. I recognize Ms. Lee from Florida for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Director Easterly, for being here today. In my former role as Florida Secretary of State, I had the opportunity, of course, to work with you, your predecessor, Director Krebs, your team over at CISA, in working to secure election infrastructure. So I'd like to begin there with a couple of questions about that sector and the work of CISA in the elections arena. Starting out, would you please describe for the committee what CISA does in collaboration with state and local election officials as it relates to cyber-specific risk assessments, and then also, where appropriate, the deployment of hunt and incident response teams to state and local elections offices? Would you please describe those services, when they're utilized, and whether you see the need for them increasing or decreasing?
Yeah, thanks so much. And thank you for your partnership and your leadership on this issue in particular. So as you know, we've been in this role now since 2017, and we have been learning constantly about the demands of election security, election infrastructure security, and really, I would say, refining our relationships with state and local officials to ensure that we are meeting their demands. As I think you know, from 2017 to 2020, our focus was very much on those cyber services, from vulnerability scanning to remote vulnerability assessments to penetration testing to helping with incident response. I think actually we are in a much better place in terms of cyber hygiene and cybersecurity with our election infrastructure. One thing that we found, however, going through 2022 was that the threats were very different now. Not only was there cyber, but there was also physical security issues, there were insider issues, and there were issues of concern around foreign influence and disinformation. So while we continue to provide those cybersecurity services, we are actually expanding our full range of services based on the demands that we're getting from state and local officials. And so one of the things that we did earlier this year was set up a full roadmap along 5 lines of effort, and we provided it to our state and local election officials. There are a full range of those cybersecurity services that you mentioned, Congresswoman, but also physical security, insider security. And then we're really pushing hard to get beyond the state and the state election directors so we can get down to communities and counties and parishes and towns, because we see those are the entities that are truly rich as a target, but cyber poor. So the other thing we did is we put together a placemat of services so that there was no mystery in terms of what we offer. And we made that available to all of our constituents using our field forces that we've grown, almost doubled over the past several years.
And on that subject, I know one of the challenges that faces CISA and many other partners across sectors as it relates to technology and cyber is recruitment and retention of appropriate, talented, trained people. And I know CISA launched the Cyber Talent Management System back in 2021 with the effort, the intention to be to recruit and retain the appropriate professionals you need for your workforce. How has CTMS been working? You mentioned the expansion of your team. Have you been able to effectively and efficiently recruit? And how does your fiscal year 24 request support the use of that operation and recruitment?
Yeah, thank you for asking the question. That was, as you probably know, about 7 years in the making. And so actually implementing it has been something that's been a real project that we've continuously had to look at how it's working and ensure it truly streamlines our ability to bring on more talent. I think we're at about 80 people with the Cyber Talent Management System and some really extraordinary talent. At this point in time, we continue to use our Title V authorities, our normal authorities, to bring on talent. We are hoping to use CTMS more aggressively this year. But I will tell you, I think the recruiting that we've done to date is a real success story. 516 people last year. We're on pace to exceed that. Our retention level is between 7 and 8%. And it's not just quantity. We are bringing in some of the best talent across the country. While our workforce has grown every year, the request that we put into the budget only adds a very small increment, I think maybe 10 people. And so what we're doing now is trying to get down to about 90% total. And then, of course, we'll focus on retention. But to be frank, I am okay if somebody comes to work at CISA for 3 to 5 years and then goes off to a hospital or a power company or a bank to help them with their critical infrastructure security, because at the end of the day, this is really about collective cyber defense, and we need to work together hand in hand.
And Mr. Chairman, my time has expired. I yield back.
The gentlelady yields back. I now recognize the gentleman from Louisiana, Mr. Carter, for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. Director Easterly, thank you very much for being here. Thank you for the incredible work that you do. In my home state of Louisiana and around the nation, far too many higher education institutions are experiencing data breaches. What steps is CISA taking to protect the privacy and integrity of our institutions and combat critical infrastructure cybersecurity issues?
It's a real scourge across the country. One of the focus areas that we did actually based on being asked by the Congress to take a look at the K-12 Cybersecurity Act was we spent a lot of time putting together a guide for K-12 schools and school districts across the country. And we work with a lot of experts to ensure that it was a guide that schools, which were part of those target-rich, resource-poor entities, could actually take advantage of. So we created this guide, very simple steps about things that can be done to prevent data breaches and ransomware attacks. We've seen a lot of that. And then what we're doing is working with our field forces to actually do outreach across the country to schools and school districts to ensure that they understand the resources, the free resources that we provide, and they can take advantage of them so they can drive down risk. And so we've aggressively started that outreach at the beginning of FY23, so that at the end of the day, we can measure success by seeing whether we were able to drive down some of these events that unfortunately
And how does that success measure?
So what we want to do...
Are you seeing success marginally?
So we see success based on the feedback we're getting. The problem is we don't know the universe of these threats at this point in time. This is why the CIRCIA, the Cyber Incident Reporting for Critical Infrastructure Act, is so fundamentally important, because we'll finally get an idea of the universe of ransomware incidents. For right now, it's a lot of the feedback that we get directly saying, because you came and spent time with us, we implemented these things, and it's helped us improve our cybersecurity.
Tell me about HBCUs. We know that HBCUs have come under attack. I'm an alumnus of Xavier University. Xavier University was hit with a substantial cyber attack that crippled the university and its system for some time. I know that Howard University and many others, likewise, in almost sequence, at one point, there were like 8 HBCUs, I think, that were hit in succession. Can you share with us any plans or actions that you've taken since that to protect or encourage or enhance the ability to make those institutions safe going forward, or safer?
Yeah, thanks for asking the question. So we've actually done a lot of work with HBCUs. Unfortunately, much of that work is about the bomb threats that they have received to ensure that their physical security and that they were prepared for that. At the same time, however, we have been working as part of our outreach to target-rich, resource-poor entities to help them understand those steps that they can take to increase their baseline. I don't have the information specifically on our outreach with respect to cyber for HBCUs, Congressman, but I'm happy to get back to you on that.
Okay.
The one point I would make is a recent program that we just implemented has had some real stunning near-term success, and some of it is with institutions of higher learning, and that's the pre-ransomware notification initiative. We'll get tips from security researchers and from industry about ransomware getting put down on a system, and before it actually gets activated, we can actually notify that entity, and they can do something about it before they have a really bad day. And many of the targets that we've been notifying are K through 12 and institutions of higher education. So I'm happy to get you more details.
And with the minute 36 I got left, I want to ask real quickly about drones. We know that we see the increased use of drones. We visited the southern border this past weekend. We know that drone traffic is incredible and a real impediment to protecting the southern border. We also know that critical infrastructure, pipelines, utility companies, crime scenes, and drug trade, because my understanding is now that the drones are bigger, they're fuel operated so they can go longer, faster, and they have the capacity to carry up to 50, 60 pounds, which makes them very, very dangerous. Can you share with us what you can about what you guys are doing relative to critical infrastructure and the drone usage?
Yeah, it's a real concern of ours as well. We have a section that's part of our infrastructure security that focuses on physical security, that is taking a hard look at this issue. We've done a few assessments to date, and we're looking to update them, working with our partners. But I've spent time in particular up in New York, where there's a real concern from our folks on the ground of nefarious use of some of these capabilities. So I'd be happy to follow up with you and get more information on the kind of things we're doing and get your feedback on what might be more helpful to your constituents.
And if there's anything that you can share that we can share with them in the way of grants, in the way of resources, in the way of things that they can be doing to better protect or arm you with facts that are going on, whether it's at the university level, at the plants or crime scenes or other critical infrastructure structures that there may be resources that they may not be available or aware of that we can make available to them.
Yeah, I'd love to follow up on that conversation in particular.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you. The gentleman yields back. I now recognize myself for 5 minutes of questioning. Director Easterly, I'd like to start my questions today by asking about a fundamental issue, our cyber workforce challenge. CISA is obviously not the only place where the workforce gap is an issue, and there are many agencies in the federal government and companies across the private sector that are working to improve the national cyber workforce. And we've talked about, and you just said in your answers to Ms. Lee, how you have been able to make some hires recently. That's very exciting news. But I want to know, what do you see as CISA's role in developing the national cyber workforce, both public and private?
Yeah, thanks for the question, Chairman. So I look at this as, first of all, we got to make sure CISA has what we need. And then there's, of course, the federal workforce, I think probably some 35,000 focused there. And then the country itself, 700,000. And cyber is a borderless space. Do you look at the big number around the world with our allies, 3.5 million. So I'd say a couple of things. First of all, with respect to the country, I do, just because we serve as America's cyber defense agency, I do think we play an important role in helping to build that pipeline. Because at the end of the day, I want to make sure CISA is successful in the next 25, 50, 100 plus years. And that frankly has to start from the youngest of ages. And so one of the things that we've done based on a grant that we received, the Cyber Education Training and Assistance Program, we've given that grant to the Cyber Innovation Center, and they make curriculum available through K through 12. So that if you are giving this curriculum to help some of our more younger members understand that, hey, this cyber thing is not that scary, it's really interesting, I want to be a part of it, that can actually start that pipeline. So I think that's one really important aspect of it. We also do retraining for the federal workforce, for those who might want to get into cyber. And then we give grants to organizations like the NPower and the Cyber Warrior Foundation, and those are underserved communities. And so we're looking using a myriad of tools. We're also working, of course, across the federal government with NIST and with the Office of the National Cyber Director that's working on the more fulsome cyber workforce strategy.
I appreciate that and all the hard work that CISA is doing. It's definitely, as you said, it's borderless. I called it the third border the other day, but I got yelled at by my staff for saying that, so I'm not allowed to say it anymore. So I do actually want to focus on something that was brought up by one of our witnesses. She was from the Bank Policy Institute. She testified that financial services sector, the cyber workforce, is spending 30 to 40% of their time on regulatory compliance. The SEC, and I just met with a major bank CISO last week who said it by the end of this year with some other regulations come out, it's probably going to be closer to 50%. And the SEC proposed a rule that seems to conflict with the requirements in the congressionally mandated Cyber Incident Reporting for Critical Infrastructure Act. So I'm wondering, we had Chairman Gensler in front of the Financial Services Committee 2 weeks ago. What steps did you and Chairman Gensler take to harmonize the proposed SEC rule with the Cyber Incident Reporting for Critical Infrastructure Act rulemaking?
Yeah, thank you for the question. And having spent 4.5 years at Morgan Stanley, and I know Heather, and I'm very sympathetic to those views. We don't want to create burden or chaos. What we want to do is ensure that we get the information in a streamlined way. And so, of course, we've had discussions across the government. As you know, Chairman, one of the things in CIRCIA was, of course, the Cyber Incident Reporting Council, which is working to figure out how to best harmonize among the various asks that we have from the private sector. I think the good news is in the legislation that you all gave us, it very specifically accounts for any crossover. So very specifically, the legislation says that if there's a requirement to report to another agency, and they have a reporting timeline that's similar to ours, if they have substantially similar information, then you can sign a memorandum of agreement so you don't have to report twice. And we are working to ensure that that is a streamlined process. I think that is really important, again, from a harmonization perspective.
I appreciate that, and I know the council's is supposed to be giving us a report, and we're waiting for that. I did want to follow up. Have you spoken to Chairman Gensler? From his testimony, it made it sound like you two speak quite often.
We absolutely have spoken, and I think we are both trying to accomplish the goal of ensuring that we get the information that we need. His role is different than mine, of course. The reason why we need the information is so we can render assistance, and also we can use that to help protect the wider ecosystem. So I'm sure I hope we'll end up in a good place.
I hope so too, and I'll just say 50% of your time on having somebody spend 50% of their time on compliance, that means 50% of the time they're not on defense
100%.
protection. So I appreciate it, and I yield back, and I recognize the gentlelady and former chairwoman of this committee, Ms. Clark from New York.
Good afternoon, and let me begin by first thanking our Chairman Garbarino and Ranking Member Swalwell for permitting me to wave onto the subcommittee for holding this very important hearing on the state of our nation's cybersecurity posture and CISA's role and perspective. Thank you, gentlemen. Let me also thank Director Easterling for your leadership and service and for joining us today. When I chaired this subcommittee last Congress, I often remarked that there is a disconnect, an imbalance, if you will, between the scope of CISA's mission, versus its authorities. Congress expects CISA to carry out one of the broadest, most ambitious missions in the federal cyberspace, but its authorities pale in comparison to many of its components and counterparts, at least until recently. In the 117th Congress, we worked across the aisle to pass legislation to empower CISA within the interagency, grow its visibility into cyber threats, and make sure CISA can require, not just request, that companies report cyber incidents to CISA for the benefit of the broader ecosystem. So I, for one, am ready to start seeing these results. So Director Easterly, my first question is about CIRCIA. First, is CISA on track to meet the rulemaking deadline in statute? And what would it take for CISA to move faster?
Thank you very much. Great to see you again, Congresswoman. I think few people in this country want me to move faster than me. And we did want an accelerated process, but we were told to go through the full rulemaking process, and we are. And you point out from an authority's perspective, we don't do law enforcement, we don't do intel, we're not a military agency, we're a voluntary agency at the end of the day. And so we felt that the consultative process was really important, particularly given some of the concerns that the chairman articulated. So we did 27 listening sessions, 17 of those were virtual. We did a request for information, we received 130 comments. We used all of that to help create the rule, which actually now exists in draft, and we are gonna have to go through the process, but that rule should go out, the notice of proposed rulemaking should go out on time in March of 24, and then the final rule is on schedule 18 months later, September 2025. Please trust me, I'm trying to do everything I can to accelerate that process, but we wanna get it right because it is so important and so groundbreaking.
Yikes. My next question is, what is CISA doing in the mechanism to make sure that it can hit the ground running when these rules go into effect?
So it's a really important question, and some of this was reflected in our budget because this is not a trivial task. We need to make sure that we have the people and the technical infrastructure in place to be able to take these huge amounts of reports that we're going to get, to ingest them, to triage them, to analyze them, to respond to them, and then to use them in an anonymized way to enable us to actually get that information out to protect the larger sector. And so that is a huge amount of work, not only just the administrative aspects of the rulemaking, but actually all of the technical infrastructure in place across the agency. So we are in the process of leveraging the funds that we've received and will hopefully receive to be able to create that.
So I want to thank you because in responding to Chairman Garbarino, you spoke about the regulatory harmonization, and that's a really key component. That's the only way we are going to keep our private sector partners engaged and on board and really feeling as though they're being heard.
Yes, ma'am.
My next question to you is whether CISA has an approach for federal regulators like the SEC or FCC about entering into MOUs to share incident reports.
Yeah, 100%, and that's what I mentioned, but I think this was a really good part of the legislation. I mean, specifically, the statute exempts companies from reporting to CISA if 3 conditions are met, if it's similar information, similar time frame, and if the other agency agrees to put an MOU in place. So we are very happy to do that. We just need to negotiate each of those MOUs, and our intent is to do that between the notice of public rulemaking and the final rule.
Very well. Well, before I close, I just want to reiterate how important it is that CISA continue to engage with stakeholders and hear outside perspectives about how to make the rules as smart, effective, and tailored as possible to the goals of CIRCIA. So thank you very much. And Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you, ma'am.
Generally yields back, and thank you for coming. We love having you back here. I now recognize Mr. Zell from Mississippi for 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good seeing you this morning, this afternoon, Ms. Clark, and other members. Director Easterly, thank you for being here and participating today. This very important hearing, and I'd like to talk about CISA's partnership with the FBI, especially considering the Joint Ransomware Task Force recent work to take down these bad actors. I understand that JCDC is working to update the National Cyber Incident Response Plan, which will also address this partnership. In this updated plan, how do you think CISA and the FBI will work together to address incident responses?
Thank you for the question. I have to say that, you know, in my, whatever, almost 30 years in government, I've never seen such a great partnership. And I say that really sincerely. Some of that was owing to personalities, but I think it is very much a result of the mission. It's a function of the mission. And so we partner very closely with FBI. In fact, the legislation, the Joint Ransomware Task Force was actually said CISA will lead. And we made the decision. We said that doesn't really make a lot of sense. We need to make sure that FBI is with us, linked arms, and so we made them a co-lead because it's really important. As you know, we have the asset response responsibilities, and FBI has the threat response. And so we work together very symbiotically in everything we do to ensure that when there's an incident, we can be there to help respond, and FBI can be there to render assistance, but to also investigate. And so I'm incredibly pleased at the quality of that relationship, both at the federal level, sir, but also with local law enforcement. And that's something that our field forces on the ground have developed really close working relationships over the past couple years.
Thank you for that. And that is just so important, working with not only the FBI, but with our local law enforcement, which is my background. So CISA is requesting $98 million for requirements with the cyber incident reporting for critical infrastructure. Can you talk just a little bit about how the agency plans to spend this money?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that. So as I was saying, this is one of the most important groundbreaking things that I think the Congress has done for cybersecurity, because for the first time, we will understand much more about the universe of incidents and attacks, and we really don't. Anybody that says it's going up, it's going down, it's completely anecdotal. So for the first time, we'll have a better picture of that. But it is not a trivial endeavor to set up the infrastructure to enable us to ingest those reports, to triage them, to analyze them, to enable a response, and then to use them in an anonymized way that protects the victim, but be able to provide that as warning to the rest of the sector and the ecosystem to help them drive down risk. So that $98 million is both people, but it's also technical infrastructure that will enable us to do all of those things, from case management to stakeholder relationship management to a threat intel platform to an analysis capability. And that's what we are putting in place now, sir, and hope that we get the additional funding to allow us to do this the right way. It's important for the nation.
Thank you. And Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. I now recognize Mr. Menendez from New Jersey for 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Mr. Ranking Member. Thank you for bringing us together here. Second time in this room in less than a couple of hours. So it's good to see you all in such good mood. So Director Easterly, thank you for joining us today. I'm really thankful to be on this subcommittee. I think about cybersecurity as often as I can. I'm also on the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee here, and serve for the 8th Congressional District in New Jersey, which is home to what security experts call the most dangerous 2 miles in the country. And that was really because of the physical assets and from a physical security perspective. But increasingly, I think about all the challenges from a cybersecurity lens. So I'm fortunate to have you here today and thankful for the work that you do. I just guess starting off, I think about it a lot, but you deal in it every day at probably the most significant position that we have in our country. How do you feel about America's preparedness from a cybersecurity perspective, addressing, guarding against cyber attacks today in 2023, on a scale of 1 to 10, let's say?
I think we have made vast strides. Even just over the last couple years, I think there is much work to be done, to be very frank. In particular, my big concern is nation-state adversaries, in particular China.
Yep.
And if you read which I'm sure you did, the Intelligence Community Annual Assessment that specifically talks about actions that China may take to disrupt our critical infrastructure in the event of a conflict, I am motivated every day on the urgency of ensuring that the country is as prepared as possible to withstand, but really to be resilient too. At the end of the day, I think our ability to prevent is very, very difficult. We have to be able to mitigate and to recover and to have the resilience to get our nation back up and running if there is a major attack.
I appreciate that. And when you engage with different stakeholders from industry, government actors, what is their perception of the risk that cybersecurity or cyber threat poses to all of us, either from municipalities who may see their tax department hacked, to infrastructure or operators of various infrastructure systems, transportation systems? Where do you see across the board in a blended sort of average on a scale of 1 to 10? I'll let you off because I'm thankful to have you here and not make you answer with a specific number. Right. But I'm just trying to gauge what the perception is out there of this threat and how serious people are taking it, because we need to take this as, in my opinion, one of the most critical threats to the well-being of our nation.
Yeah, I agree with you, and I think it's improving. It's improving because of Colonial Pipeline.
Yep.
It's improving because of the scourge of ransomware. Ransomware has become, sadly, a kitchen table issue, and therefore we're making cybersecurity and cyber hygiene a kitchen table issue. It's not where it needs to be, but it's much better because of those things. And so we are working now with the field force day in, day out, with businesses large and small, with some of these entities that weren't really thinking about their cybersecurity, and telling them these are the basics that you need to do. Because it's not, when you're doing the basics, you can actually deal with the vast majority of the kind of threats that you would get from a cyber criminal organization.
And definitely let us know how we can help amplify that message, right? When we do small business tours, right, we're generally talking about tax credits and small business, right? But we should be talking about cybersecurity as well when we're visiting all these different institutions, small, medium-sized businesses, companies in our districts. But you're sort of alluding to the challenge that I'm sure gives you a lot of concern, that gives me a lot of concern, is that we're admittedly not where we need to be. And the way I see this threat, especially when you talk about nation-state adversaries, right? Because it's not just China, it's Russia, it's Iran, and they are serious about having this ability to target our various online components, especially our infrastructure, which concerns me. But the thing that keeps me up sometimes at night, because a lot of things in this job keep me up at night. Not my friends here. This cybersecurity subcommittee is great, but the reality is that the speed of the threat and the way in which it can develop is exceedingly fast. And as we do in this country, we're thoughtful, but that means that we're not as quick as our adversaries may be. What can we do here to enable you, to enable your partners and various stakeholders to not just be constantly playing catch up, which is going to be harder and harder to do the more compounding that this challenge becomes, but what can we do to potentially get ahead in the not too distant future?
Yeah, thank you for asking the question. It's a really, really important one. First, in terms of how you can help, to help amplify our message, I think, Chairman, you've done that before in terms of, I'm a big fan of multi-factor authentication, so I think, Congresswoman, you have as well. So I would welcome all of you to help us get that message out. That's one thing. The other thing is we have done cybersecurity roundtables in some of your districts, and we would love to do more. So if that's something we can do to sit down with your constituents, please let us know. We've got field forces. Now, to your larger question, I think it's exactly the right one. At the end of the day, what we are doing as a status quo can help make us more resilient, but I do not think it's sufficient or sustainable. I think we need to take a different approach, and this is one of the things we've been doing a lot of work on. First and foremost, we need to ensure that the technology that underpins the critical services and functions that Americans rely on every day is built secure. Secure by design with a limited number of vulnerabilities, and secure by default with things like multi-factor authentication built in from the start. We have, because of misaligned incentives, basically allowed innovation, and we love innovation, but innovation should not trump safety and security in a world where we all rely on tech. So that's a really important message, and I'd love to talk more about it at a separate time. The second thing is we need to make sure that every leader, every CEO, every boardroom is embracing corporate cyber responsibility as a matter of good governance. Incredibly important that that not get delegated to the IT people or the CISO, but that CEOs see it as their responsibility. And then finally, we need to continue pushing hard on persistent operational collaboration, the kind of things that we're building with the Joint Cyber Defense Collaborative. That's about a default to share on malicious activity, knowing that a threat to one is a threat to all. It's about a co-equal partnership between government and industry with reciprocal expectation of value add and transparency, where the private sector doesn't have to worry about punitive sanction because they share information. And then getting rid of the friction. It has to be a frictionless experience. We have to have shared analytics, shared platforms, and that's what we're building with our joint collaborative environment and our cyber analytic data services. So those three things are different in kind, and I believe it's those kind of things that will really enable us to get ahead of this very difficult threat.
That's extremely helpful. Chair, I appreciate your generosity on time. Yield back.
No, I thought it was a very important question. I really wanted that on the record. So the gentleman yields back, and I now recognize my colleague from Texas, Mr. Luttrell, for 5 minutes of questioning.
What's the best part about going last? Everybody asked the questions that I was going to ask. Thank you, Mr. Menendez. That was mine. I've been prepping that for 2 weeks.
You're not last.
I'd been prepping for 3 weeks.
All right, well, always an overachiever.
Don't worry, you're not last.
I mimic my colleague from California, Mr. Swalwell's statement. You are the leading edge. You are the next phase of combative frontier in the protection of our countries, the cyberspace. We'll no longer fight wars the way that my colleagues and I did in the military with bombs, planes, and guns. It's you. And so thank you for taking and shouldering that weight. To drive a point home real quick, as far as when Mr. Menendez asked what we can do, I think we just need to stay out of your way and give you the autonomy that you need. And understanding that in the cyberspace, when it comes to threat and risk, we're so siloed, and that is an issue. Are you having success in breaking down those silos when it comes to multi-department coordination?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think one of the things that the Joint Cyber Defense Collaborative gave us was the legislation. It's in statute. It's the only cyber entity in statute that says we bring together the federal cyber ecosystem. So not just CISA, but FBI and NSA and Cybercom and other agencies. That's why, it was built to actually break down those silos. And we've been doing that over a short period of time, not just bringing in industry, but bringing in state and local colleagues, bringing in international partners, and then by design, bringing in the federal government. So that is not an easy thing to do, sir.
I wouldn't think so.
We are trying really hard. And I have to say, I joined this job from the private sector, and I thought there were a lot of issues with silos and a lack of cohesion. And so we know what the problem is, and we were working hard to enable us to fix it.
That's great to hear. I'm sure just the sheer scalability is pretty arduous. But as far as operating across multiple cloud services, with our threat hunting teams, are we having success in that? Because everyone's different. I mean, the communication between the two are just completely, they're just Army Navy to each other. That's the analogy I got. I'm sorry.
Be Navy.
I was waiting on that one, right? So to my point, if we do have a threat or an active attack in a certain corporation, private department, whatever, do we have success if it can move across multiple domains with CISA's ability to track that, but also notify and prevent?
Yeah, so it's another really, really important question. Let me hit first on the federalcivilian.gov, because we've been looking to make a lot of improvements there. And so we have radically improved visibility that we really didn't have in SolarWinds. And so because of the authorities that we have to put endpoint detection and response capabilities at departments and agencies, we can do that persistent hunting, so we can have that visibility. We also now have something that gives us a dashboard level view to say what's going on at those systems. So that visibility is improving. On cloud providers in particular, there's something called the shared responsibility model. I think, as a military guy, if no one's in charge, like no one's in charge at the end. If everyone's in charge, no one's in charge. And so I have a little bit of concern with the shared responsibility model, particularly if it's putting the burden of responsibility on businesses that just don't have the resources to bear it. So I think at the end of the day, cloud providers need to bear the bulk of the security burden. And the visibility should come back to the entity that is contracted with those cloud service providers. And so very important that things like logging, for example, security logs help us understand the nature of a threat and malicious activity. But oftentimes, if a cloud service provider is charging you extra for that security feature, then the customer will lack visibility. So there are things that we need to do to work with cloud providers to ensure that the shared responsibility model is not misplacing the burden on those who can't bear it.
Okay, I really would like to see that. Not that it's not doing this, but translate down into my rural district in Polk County. You know, that's just something that hasn't come to fruition yet. So I'm hoping that CISA will continue to push the envelope and make sure that it's the American public at the end of the day
100%.
that needs protected, and not everyone.
Yeah,
Great.
100%.
Thank you so much. I yield back, Mr.
Yeah.
Chairman. Thank you.
I'd love to come out to your district and
Come on.
have the discussion.
You bet.
Gentleman yields back. I now recognize the ranking member, Mr. Swalwell, for 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you, Chairman. And Director, as you've laid out your mission and your accomplishments and your challenges, I see it that one of your greatest challenges is to figure out what are your core competencies and what you can do well to have the greatest impact, and then what are the gaps that CISA can fill, and also what are the most important functions that need to be carried out, even when doing so is controversial or risks picking a fight. So I was hoping you could speak to that.
Yeah, thank you for asking the question. You know, when I came into this job, my predecessor is a great friend of mine, did a strategic intent document. And that laid out some great priorities for what we do operationally. But, you know, frankly, we needed a roadmap. So we spent about a year actually developing that strategic plan. And if you take a look at that, and I'm sure you've seen it, but it's organized not by our divisions or our mission enabling offices. It's organized by 4 key principles: cyber defense, infrastructure risk and resilience, operational collaboration, and agency unification. Because I'm a firm believer that if everything's a priority, nothing's a priority. And so we basically laid out, these are the things that everybody in the agency needs to do, and we laid out representative outcomes as well as a measurement approach. Now, based on that, every entity, every division, every mission enabling office did an annual operating plan that lays out at a more granular level the measures of effectiveness and measures of performance that they are responsible for, and I track them on a quarterly basis. So we are really looking at being much more rigorous in how we allocate our resources and how we allocate our time to ensure that we are being good stewards of the taxpayer dollars.
Thank you, Director. With respect to JCDC, kind of a similar question. CISA needs to decide, you know, what are the core capabilities JCDC will focus on, where it also can be most effective, and put structure and processes in place to formalize those functions. So can you help me understand how you're thinking about some of those questions as it relates to JCDC's scope and mission moving forward?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I just gave a copy to you and the chairman, and would love to have the team come in and brief anybody who's interested, because I really think this is one of the most important and groundbreaking things that the Congress has given us. And so we have the strategy for the JCDC that we just finished up serendipitously in time for this hearing. And so the focus is about 2 fundamental things. One is about planning and ensuring that we can plan against the most serious threats to the nation. The second is collaborative fusion to help us understand the threat and then to drive down risk to the nation. Now, given the myriad of threats that we face, there are a lot of demands that we have to enable us to be able to respond and be proactively prepared for various threats. So we've operationalized it against a significant vulnerability, Log4j, with the Shields Up campaign, with the elections. But we are being very deliberate about what efforts we take on. And that is based on the threat and based on the feedback that we get from our partners. So if you look at the planning agenda, it's water, it's energy, it's open source software to reduce risk to industrial control systems. So it's things that our partners asked us to focus on that we, based on the threat and the risk, we decide to focus on. But every one of those efforts has outcomes that are measurable, and then we get feedback from our partners.
Earlier this week, DHS released its proposal to authorize the Cyber Safety Review Board, CSRB, a public-private panel established by executive order in 2021 to investigate significant cyber incidents, as you alluded to earlier, similar to NTSB. What would the relationship be between the CSRB and CISA, and how would it interact with CISA's new cyber incident reporting authorities, specifically, as you referenced in your opening statement, the subpoena authority? Do you see CSRB as sufficiently separate from CISA to preserve its voluntary partnerships with the private sector?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, as the CSRB, so I appoint the members and we actually manage the infrastructure and the contract for that. But they have a distance from me, so I'm not part of that decision-making to keep some important sort of cushion there. With respect to the admin subpoena, the Congress very helpfully gave us admin subpoena separate, which allows us to actually do scanning of infrastructure, and then if we see a vulnerability, we can do a subpoena to find out who that victim is so we can tell them. There is admin subpoena authority that comes with the CIRCIA as well. So I think it's probably a helpful thing for the CSRB to have it, and I don't think that there are any issues with their admin subpoena power as it relates to CISA's secret sauce, frankly, which is being seen as a trusted partner, not a regulator, or not anybody who's going to issue punitive sanction.
Great, thank you. Yield back.
Gentleman yields back. I now recognize my friend from Florida and the chair of the Transportation and Maritime Security Subcommittee, Mr. Jimenez.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to the ranking member. Ms. Easterly, I have two separate subjects that I want to talk about. One of them is when I was mayor of Miami-Dade, I was approached and said that there may be some issues with the cranes at our port, where I think out of 13 cranes, 10 of them were made in China. And then later found out maybe about 70 to 80% of the cranes in the United States are actually made in China. Now, some of those cranes have, all of those that are made in China, the skin, the bones, okay, are made in China, but in some, the internal workings, the guts. Some of the computer systems and the operating systems may be made in Germany or in some other place, but in some, it's all Chinese made. And I was made aware that there may be some threats with this. I have two things I'm concerned about. Number one, if the CCP decides not to replace with replacement parts or spare parts when they break down, it could hurt our ability to provide commerce, since most of the stuff that we moves through these cranes. Or two, if it's actually a Chinese software reporting back to the CCP so they can track everything that we do, what cargo is flowing through to where, et cetera, et cetera. Have you assessed that situation in the United States?
Yeah, it is a real concern of ours, and I think my head of cyber is going to appear before your committee on the 10th of May. I think you're referring to Zenhua, the port machinery company, 70–80%, 23 seaports. We have significant concerns about supply chain disruption as well as surveillance. We are working with our partners across the government to help with analysis and what we can do about it. Difficult given the market share piece of this, but I do think it is a significant problem that we need to turn our attention to. I also would just say, Congressman, that this is a piece of the larger issue of Chinese technology encroaching into our national security, and I worry about that from a very strategic perspective. We're actually setting up a counter PRC cyber effort that will be led by a very talented person that we're bringing on through Cyber Talent Management System authorities. But this is things that we absolutely have to get ahead of.
Fair enough. I don't want to give too much away because, it's his committee, not my committee. So I'll bring it to mind. The other thing I want to talk about is completely different, and it just came to me, that 80% of the drones that are used in the United States are actually manufactured in China too. And it's come to my attention that on occasion with these drones, you hook it up to try to get a software update, okay? And I was wondering if when you're doing the software update, you're also downloading information the other way. So can you imagine if the CCP, the PRC, had all the information gathered, all the images gathered by 80% of the drones flying around? That's an incredible amount of data. So is that download two-way or is it one-way? Have we ever checked out to see if there's information going the other way? Or is something, I just thought of something nobody thought of?
Yeah, when you think about the number of Chinese drones, it makes you worry less about the high altitude balloon in some ways when you consider that. But all of these are significant threats that we need to take seriously. I don't know the specifics. What I would tell you from a technical perspective that I worry more about is not something being uploaded, but if they're saying downloads this software, provide this update, they could be putting something malicious in that update. That was sort of what happened with SolarWinds and the Russians. There was something malicious in that software update. So I do think that there are significant concerns, again, given any sort of oversight or surveillance of a foreign adversary who's clearly the preeminent threat to this nation.
But do you know for sure if they're not uploading information back to the host?
I do not know that. Happy to check it out or get you some information on it. But there's Chinese capabilities that are getting TikTok, for example. There's a ton of data from the 130 million Americans that use that is very likely going back to the PRC.
And what's your agency doing about Trojan horses? When I say Trojan horse, it's some kind of malware that's stuck in a program that just sits dormant until they decide to unleash it.
Yeah.
And that worries me too, that there may be Trojan horses all over the place we know nothing about.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden, unleash havoc on the United States. Are we taking steps to try to avert that too?
Well, that sort of goes to the entire heart of our mission, sir, really. I mean, because our job is to protect and defend critical infrastructure, it's our work with partners across the country to ensure that they're aware of those types of capabilities that can be used not just for espionage, but also for destruction or disruptive purposes. So a lot of this comes down to education, but also it comes down to my earlier point. The technology that we rely on every day was not created with security and safety in mind. And I think it's incredibly important that those technology products are tested and developed specifically before it comes to the consumer to look for potential vulnerabilities like that.
Thank you, ma'am. My time is up.
Thank you, sir.
Gentleman yields back. We finished the first round of questions. I think there are a couple who want to ask a second round. So don't worry, your donut is safe in the back. We still have it for you. So we're going to start the second round. I'm going to recognize a gentleman from Louisiana, Mr. Carter, for second round of questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director Easterly, as we see technology move as fast as it does, we know that every day there's some new mode or method to infiltrate, to damage, to destroy. On a scale of 1 to 10, what would you say your agency feels about your ability and capability to remain competitive and equal to, hopefully a step ahead of, the bad guys?
It's hard to give you a 1 to 10. I would want to say we're at a 7. But it's an anecdotal thing. Every day we work to stay ahead of an adversary. I think that, to be very frank with you, Congressman, I don't worry about capability. I think the United States of America has the most capable cyber forces in the world. I worry about the asymmetry of values. Because our adversaries, the Chinese, the Russians, the North Koreans, the Iranians, cyber criminals, will do things with impunity that we frankly wouldn't do as a values-based democracy. That's where I think we have to be concerned. And that's why this idea of the status quo being unacceptable, we have to ensure that everybody in this nation from K through gray is aware of what they need to do to stay safe online, that CEOs are taking responsibility, that software companies are building safe products, and that we are all working closely together for the good of the nation.
And along that line, the Biden administration's national cybersecurity strategy attempts to shift the emphasis away from consumers to the provider. This is a big idea that could substantially impact the price of software, its utility, cost, and competitiveness for the U.S. software industry and international markets. Understanding that much of our economic prosperity for the past several decades is based on innovation in computer software. What microeconomic model is DHS proposing to deal with this? When we shift the responsibility, there's a lot of risk that comes with that and a lot of challenge.
Yeah. I can't speak to the microeconomic model. Happy to follow up on that. I think.
Okay, now that's number 3 that you couldn't speak to today for me. Just keep record.
You know, I'm a macroeconomic person, but, you know, happy to follow up.
Fair enough.
But look, at the end of the day, this is a big concept, shifting the burden. Just to kind of talk about this at a strategic level, it's been 40 years since the internet came into being, right, with TCP/IP. You think back to 1983. Nobody thought about security when we created an internet. Nobody thought about safety security when we created software. Nobody thought about that when we were moving fast and breaking things with social media. And here we are in AI, and we're hurtling into a space that, frankly, we don't know what the outcomes will be. So I am a huge fan of innovation. It's one of our core values. But what I'm saying, Congressman, is we cannot let innovation be the most important thing that we look at when we're thinking about creating products that Americans rely on every single day. I want to live in a world where I do not have to teach my 90-year-old mom how to enable multi-factor authentication on her phone. I want to live in a world where I don't have to check the box that I agree to the 17,000-word contract to turn my phone on that basically says you're liable for everything bad that happens here.
Aren't we there? Aren't we there?
Aren't we there in terms of?
All of the things that you just mentioned.
No, not at all. None of these things are baked in. That's the world that we need to live in, where security and safety is baked in just as your seatbelt, your airbags are baked in, come with your car.
I find that the more technology moves, the more sophisticated the basic functions are. You mentioned the telephone, you mentioned checking the box. That stuff does exist now, and it's getting more and more complicated for the average person to use any level of electronics. And I understand the importance of technology moving. Are we moving in a direction that we're able to combat the threat of the infrastructure threat of ransomware, cyber attacks that cripple networks?
Yeah, I think we are indeed getting more capable as a nation, and a lot of that is the growth in this agency that the Congress has generously helped us with. But you know, at the end of the day, I think we're sort of saying the same thing here, Congressman. The complexity, we should not be putting the complexity on the consumer. The complexity needs to be put on the provider, so everything is almost seamless and easy for the consumer. The consumer shouldn't have to figure out how to implement all those security controls. They need to come baked in.
And with that, are you concerned about what it does to the economics of it? And I don't want to go deep into the macroeconomics of it, but the costs associated with what does that mean to the consumer? As we shift more responsibility to the provider, it's safe to assume that we're going to also see some pushback on what it costs the individual.
I would much rather live in a world where I have much safer products, in a world that everything is digitized and connected, and we are increasingly vulnerable as we leap into this space where everything is going to be smart and IoT. I would much rather pay it at the front end and know that I have a safe product rather than knowing I'm going to get attacked with ransomware.
I could not agree with you more, except we have to
the gentleman's time.
May I just kind of finish real fast? But we have to take into consideration that we have a lot of poor people. There are a lot of people who that extra fee that we're talking about that's tacked on to the consumer makes a big difference to a person that's on a fixed income, that's unemployed or underemployed. So I would just ask that as we move forward, that we're considerate of the fact that while we want to make sure that the provider does this and there may be an extra cost associated, let's just be mindful that that extra cost to many Americans can be deal breakers.
100%.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. I now recognize Mr. Zell from Mississippi for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And thank you, Director, again for being here this afternoon. It's good to see you and hear all this stuff that is very complicated. I live in basically a pretty rural district. And how is the CISA addressing some of the challenges that cybersecurity in the rural areas, especially with the cyber workforce? You know, we kind of talked about that some, but you know, out in the rural areas, you know, we need a little help.
Yeah. One of the things I'm most excited about, sir, is the cybersecurity grants for state and local. I think this is a really groundbreaking program. You know, $1 billion is not a lot, but I think if we can prove out the model, we can actually make a real difference to those entities that frankly are not well resourced at all. So I think, as you know, 80% of the money goes out to local and 25% of that goes to rural. And so it is very specifically focused on how to improve cybersecurity in places that typically don't have resources. So what we've seen to date is we've seen requests for training to improve that cyber workforce. We've seen requests for equipment and requests for assessment. And I think we've got 15 plans in. We've approved all but, I want to say, 2 of them. And then 7, I think, the money's already gone forward. And I think Mississippi actually may be one of them. So I will check on that. But that money, I think, has already been dispersed. So we're working very hard to get that out the door.
Thank you very much. We plan on having a cybersecurity roundtable in August, and hopefully we could reach out and maybe you could come out and help us a little bit.
I would love that.
Very good. We'll take you and get some good seafood down on the Gulf Coast. But, you know, we've talked a lot about some of the threats, but in your view, what is the greatest cybersecurity threat that the Congress should be paying attention to right now?
Yeah, I think there are 2 epoch-defining threats and challenges. One is China, and the other, I think, is artificial intelligence. There are some incredible things that AI will do, but we need to ensure that just as we're talking about technology being built with security in mind, we need to ensure that these fantastic capabilities have the right controls and guardrails to keep us safe and secure. So I think those 2 challenges are things that we're going to be concerned about over the next 10, 20 years and more.
Thank you very much. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. I now recognize my colleague from New Jersey, Ms. Menendez, for a second round.
Thank you, Chairman. And again, just want to express my appreciation for you holding this hearing today. My colleague from Florida, we have ports in my district. I was a commissioner at the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey, and seeing our cybersecurity spending go up and up each and every year because of the importance of our infrastructure and being very sensitive to how much of our technology is produced in China. The only reason I like being here is because my grandmother lived to be 98. She only had a high school education, but into the last years of her life, she loved learning about the new technology and watching it develop. And you can imagine someone who was 98, the technology and the advances in technology. And she said she loved learning about it. It didn't scare her at all. But what scared her is how quickly it was changing, and that we weren't giving ourselves the opportunity to think about what it means for us. And so your point about innovation just brought me back to those conversations, and they're important ones. But you also brought up so many good points. So thank you for your testimony, and thank you for what you're doing in your role as director. You know, but going back to the secure by design, secure by default, I mean, there seems to be sort of a challenge there because, as my colleague was alluding to, how much of our technology is produced in China, which you've made several references to in your testimony. And secure by design, secure by default makes complete sense. But if we're not developing it, then how do we make sure and hold accountable, foreign potential adversaries who are developing critical technology for us? And you also said how much we rely on technology, which we are, right? So it's becoming a compounding problem where we are almost losing the ability to live without this technology, and yet we're not developing it ourselves. So how in this sort of manufacturing R&D sort of space and time that we live in with the reliance on entity or countries like China, can we get to a secure by design, secure by default future?
So we are actually very actively ensuring that if there is Chinese technology or products within our supply chain, certainly for the federal government, but also in terms of our ability to use a platform for informing critical infrastructure owners or operators about the dangers of Chinese technology, we would recommend that be replaced or not used, frankly,
That's a challenging thing.
Which is very, I agree with you,
When you say
Congressman.
supply chain and making sure you go through all the levels of a supply chain and make sure all the different component pieces are secure by design, secure by default.
It is very challenging. As my friend Kemba Walden likes to say, the word easy does not appear in the National Cybersecurity Strategy. But it's one of the reasons, to be frank, we are pushing so hard on the instantiation of software bill of materials. We have to understand what is in our supply chain.
100%.
Incredible complexity, but we can't say that because I didn't know, I was able to, our foreign adversaries did these implants and now our infrastructure has been compromised and disrupted or ultimately destroyed in the event of a conflict. So these are all very difficult things. But, frankly, that's why this subcommittee and this partnership is so important for the security of the nation.
Absolutely, and please, I'm sure you know us, but please do consider us a partner, and these are things that we want to work on. But if there was a way, or almost thinking about it, sort of as like a way to, as we sort of onboard technology or bring it through, just because I think the going through the supply chain, because you just see it on the sanctions front, right, and all the workarounds that there are from different state actors, NDIs that appear on our sanctions list. That alone is really challenging to track. And then when you get to technology and being able to do that cross-border, I feel like that's going to be a challenge. But this was all really helpful. I went over on my last time, so I'm going to be mindful this time. And my colleague from Texas just arrived, so I'm going to make sure she gets to her questions sooner. Thank you again so much. And I really look forward to continuing this conversation with you and your staff. I yield back.
Thank you. The gentleman is back. I now recognize Mr. Jimenez from Florida for his second round.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As we talk about the big threat, you said the two big threats are the CCP and AI. And we also talk here about how we need to start to decouple, but if I were to tell you that I just heard of a major purchase of Chinese computers from one of our major departments, like $500 million worth, right? Kind of makes you start, are they listening to us, or who are they listening to that they would go and buy $500 million in computers made in China or Chinese company? So I think we need to get that word out, and I think there's since I serve on a select committee on China, it's one of the areas that I find where we have bipartisan support, and we kind of think the same way. We may not have the same solutions or maybe an iteration of solutions, but we're on the same path, and it's good to see that America has finally woken up and collectively we're working to address this threat. I want to go to AI. People are trying to say, hey, we need to slow down AI. Frankly, we cannot slow down AI because our adversaries are not going to slow down with AI. And they understand the potential of artificial intelligence and all sorts of things. But in military hardware, AI, if they get that advantage on us, it's huge. So we can't. We have to keep going. But that being said, AI has the potential to do incredible good, unbelievable good. The mankind, womankind, the human race can just explode, all right, with new findings, new knowledge, new abilities through the use of this technology. But then AI is also can be incredibly destructive. So the only defense that we're going to have against AI is AI. So are we developing that capability too? You have AI can do good, but then you also know that AI can do bad. So you have to have the defensive AI to fight the bad AI. Are we working on that too?
Yeah, I mean, I am not an AI technical expert. I know that there is a lot of work being done both on the defensive side and on the offensive side. And I agree with you, Congressman, that there are some amazing things that can be done with this capability. But I've also, probably much like you, seen a dark side when I was in the Army, when I was deployed many times, and when I was the head of counterterrorism at the White House. And what I worry about are our adversaries, whether it's a nation state like China or a terrorist or a criminal, using these to create malware, cyber weapons, to create bioweapons, to do genetic engineering, to do things that, frankly, we may not do as a values-based democracy. And I think we need to have those really difficult and important conversations, because I really do believe in the power of good for technology, but AI will also be the most powerful weapons of this century. And the most powerful weapons of the last century, nuclear weapons, were built and maintained by governments who were disincentivized to use them. This technology is built by companies whose job it is to maximize profits for their shareholders. So it's a different conversation, and I applaud the efforts to try and get ahead of it, both by the Congress as well as many across the federal government. I think it's incredibly important.
Thank you very much, and I yield back.
Thank you, sir.
The gentleman yields back. I now recognize the gentlelady from Texas, Ms. Jackson Lee, for 5 minutes.
Let me thank you for the courtesies extended and thank the ranking member for the courtesies extended. Appreciate being delayed for other meetings, but let me welcome you, Director Easley. And I'm hoping to get some real quick questions in. I invited you last year. It starts out with an invitation to the Energy Brain Trust that I host with Congressional Black Caucus Foundation. You were kind enough to send someone, but I am now inviting you for 2023. This Brain Trust has been around now for more than 30 years, and we have enjoyed the participation of many in the administration. So someone is taking notes, and I appreciate it very much that you're doing so. I want to just continue on the line of questioning. I find the production domestically of chips, and I wanted to raise some quick questions. How important is the manufacturing of chips in the United States to cybersecurity, the security of our cyber system? Doing our chips, having that manufacturing capacity right here in the United States.
I think it's hugely important for the U.S. to have that chip manufacturing capacity from a technology perspective. I mean, certainly in terms of cybersecurity systems, chips are not a huge piece of the actual process, but they're part of the technology, absolutely.
We remember that during the pandemic when phones, cars, and others were not able to be manufactured because of the supply chain. Let me quickly move to Houston. The list of critical infrastructure includes petrochemical companies. In fact, years past, when we think about cyber or think about infrastructure, it was listing these fixed entities, and we which heavily rely on automation. Have petrochemical companies engaged with CISA in order to develop a good working relationship to deal with their critical infrastructure problems? And I got another quick question.
Yes, ma'am, absolutely. We serve as the sector risk management agency for the chemical sector and have great relationships with those industries.
One of the gaps in CISA in terms of across the nation are NGOs, faith organizations, neighborhood organizations, small businesses, maybe even small colleges. And so I'd be interested in working with the agency for a roundtable in laying the groundwork of informing that kind of level in the United States that are not necessarily informed, is that a good idea to make sure that we can have CISA in our communities talking to that level and to be able to raise up their understanding of the importance of cybersecurity?
Love it.
We all have had the horrors of ransomware. We are facing it, the threats over the years, the stories, the tall tales, if you will. And Russia continues to harbor large numbers of ransomware gangs. We know this threat will remain forward, but I've been impressed about what you've done. Do you want to expand a little bit on how you've gotten your hands around ransomware? And I'm looking at my time, so let me put the second question in. AI is here. I was just talking to my seatmate here, and I was saying it was coming, and he made it very clear that we both agree it is here. I'm concerned about large populations, low income, minorities, rural persons, out of the circle of even understanding AI and its good and its dangers. Maybe you can comment on that as it relates to cybersecurity and maybe the gaps of knowledge. So first, Russia and the ransomware, and then second, the AI and its accessibility to those low-income communities. Thank you so very much.
Thank you so much, Congresswoman. On ransomware, we have done so much since the summer of 2021, actually following the Colonial Pipeline attack. Specifically, we stood up stopransomware.gov, which is a one-stop shop website that brings together all of the federal resources of the government to explain what ransomware is, what to do if you get hit with ransomware, and more importantly, how to build resilience to ransomware. We also stood up the Joint Ransomware Task Force recently, and we're very focused on target-rich, resource-poor, those communities that frankly, like schools and hospitals and water facilities, local election offices that don't have those resources. So we are very focused on providing things like ransomware assessments and best practices that they can use to deal with the scourge of ransomware. The other thing that we just launched is our ransomware warning vulnerability pilot, where entities, no matter what your size is, can sign up for vulnerability scanning and then get a prioritized list of where they might have vulnerabilities, where ransomware actors, like Russian-sponsored ransomware actors, have specifically leveraged ransomware, so that allows them to patch those. And then finally, our pre-ransomware initiative, where we're getting tips from industry, from researchers, from threat intel, that tell us that malware has been deployed but not yet activated. It's usually hours to days before malware is used to encrypt. And then we reach out in our field force. We've done it with K-12 schools, with local towns, to help them prevent a really bad day. And that is the virtue of the model we've built with trust with industry. So those are some of the things that we're doing, and we're going to continue to drive that forward. On artificial intelligence, again, there are great capabilities. I think we need a really hard look at who these capabilities, who they're being used by, who they can be made available to, but also the guardrails for safety and security that are being put in place, even as we innovate in this space. And so I think it's a longer, much, hugely important conversation. So I appreciate the question, Congresswoman.
I look forward to engaging through this committee or otherwise. I think it's an important discussion for members of Congress.
Thank you, ma'am.
I thank you so very much. Thank you for the time. I yield back. Let's do it. Thank you.
Generally yields back, and the end is almost near, Director. I think, though, the fact that everybody has been here today for a second round of questions, we've never had attendance like this, but that just shows how much everybody respects your opinion and how important of an issue this is. So I'm gonna recognize myself for my second round of questions. And I had a couple on secure by design default, but I really enjoyed the questions before. I thought there was a great conversation. So I'm going to move ahead to my staff actually prepared enough questions if we had 8 rounds of questions. So I'll probably submit a couple and have you respond in writing. But I did want to get to you on, we talked a lot about the JCDC in our last hearing. We've talked a little bit about it today as well. And I've spoken to a couple people that are on, or companies that are on the JCDC, and we've heard that some of the companies are frustrated that information coming out of the JCDC is frequently already publicly available and isn't as timely as it could be What information do organizations get through the JCDC that goes beyond what DHS already publishes through other channels that many JCDC members already participate in, already have access to? And I wanted to add, they all love the idea. They all love the idea of the JCDC, but they did have this complaint about it. So if you could answer, that'd be great.
Yeah, and one of our operating principles at CISA is to treat feedback as a gift. And we are constantly talking to our partners so that we can improve, because at the end of the day, the model has to be we're transparent, we're responsive, and we're adding value. If we're not adding value to the job of a cyber defender, we should go away. I know how hard that job is, and we're just trying to help them. Anecdotally, I think we've heard various flavors of, these products are fantastic, and these products are things that we've already seen. So I don't want to put too much into the fact that these are all that you might hear one or two things. I would like to actually come back to you maybe with a more fulsome presentation based on recent feedback. We did 2 roundtables out at RSA. I mean, I will tell you what's substantively different in the products and the advisories that we've put out over the past year is, first of all, they're all multi-sealed. And that makes a difference to have CISA and FBI and NSA, and by the way, our international partners on there as well. It's sending finally a coherent signal to industry that this is the voice of the US government collaboratively providing you feedback. And frankly, we have those enriched by our industry partners who are giving us information that helps to make those products better. So again, I'll go back and get you more specifics on that, but I think we've really evolved that into a better place, to be honest with you.
Right. And look, everybody that I've spoken to, they said CISA, when they provide information, has been responsive much more than other agencies that are involved. So that's great on your part. So we do appreciate that. We've also, so how does, there was also some comments about how membership decisions are made. I know we can, maybe we can work that into the presentation, but could you talk about how CISA balances the benefits of having a wider range of partners at the table with the risk that too large of a JCDC could reduce the efficiency of operational collaboration and decrease trust between the members?
Yeah, thanks for asking that question. You just said it, trust, right? We have a lot of people, Ranking Member Swalwell mentioned, a lot of people want to join the JCDC, and we want to benefit from their expertise and their vulnerability and their capabilities. But we also want to make sure that we have trust groups. So we started out, when we set this thing up in August of 2021, we started out with the big tech companies. Why? Because they have the most global visibility. If you're an infrastructure provider, a cybersecurity vendor, a software vendor, they have global reach. And we wanted to help solve that visibility problem that was illuminated in SolarWinds, where we lacked visibility. So we started out with a small group, but since that period of time, we have been adding on hundreds of partners. We're at 231. But the projects that we work on are basically 20 of these entities. And so we are keeping the trust groups small. We're focused on efforts that address the biggest risks to the nation. And we are constantly doing after-action reviews to ensure that we can actually take great advantage of the talents, the authorities, the capabilities. The one other thing I'd say, Chairman, is we talk a lot about industry, but the JCDC is actually industry, international partners, federal partners, and state and local partners. So when you think about the tapestry of visibility that comes together based on the inputs of all of those partners, I would challenge some of the comments about the lack of value. I think as we've evolved, I think we're getting into a place where that information is enriched and full of a lot more value than anything we've provided before from the federal government.
Director, I appreciate your answer. Like I said, I had a couple more, but I'm going to let you. Look, I'll send them and have you respond writing. I appreciate it, and I now yield to the ranking member, my colleague from California, Mr. Swalwell, for his second round.
Great. Thank you, Chairman. And just following up on my colleague from the Miami area, he talked about the concern about Chinese drones and Chinese technologies in our infrastructure, and I privately mentioned to him, but I'll mention to my other colleagues that John Garamendi and I introduced legislation this week called the Airport Infrastructure Vehicle Security Act, which would prohibit federal funds from being spent on Chinese buses. They are flooding our communities with cheap passenger buses, and it's not just that this hurts the ability to make it in America. They're wiring these buses up with Wi-Fi and other abilities to connect to the network. So we'll send that around to everyone. On AI, to kind of take this to the worst case scenario, I understand that a zero-click attack is where I could receive a text message or an email, and even with the best cyber hygiene, because it was sent to me, that's it, they're in. And I also understand that right now, to conduct those zero-click attacks, they're very resource intensive, they're very expensive. So adversaries have to really want to get into someone's system or device. Does AI put us at risk of significantly reducing the cost for the adversary to carry out a zero-click attack?
I mean, I don't have a technical study on that, but I would assume so. I think as much as AI can be used for amazing things, I think it can be used by our adversary to cause great damage. The saying, ranking member, is, you only have to be right once. As an adversary, as a defender, you got to be right all the time. Think about that in terms of the offense-defense overmatch of an adversary. Yeah. And so it makes our job even more difficult. Now, the optimists, and I used to be a big tech optimist, and now I'm a tech realist, that you'll say, well, we can also create these incredible defensive AI capabilities, and that's probably true.
Sure.
But the thing that I worry about is we are hurtling into this space driven by competition in business, not necessarily driven by safety or security concerns. And while I am, to Congressman Jimenez's point earlier, I am concerned about China, but look at the difference. China is focused on implementing AI with a huge amount of regulation, right? And so that's the difference. They are actually being very purposeful about how they're controlling and evolving that capability. We are not. And so I think we need to just think about what AI looks like in China and what AI looks like here and how it can be used for nefarious purposes.
Shifting to insurance, there's not a lot of insurers in the cyber market, and one insurer told me that the most successful insurer is not the person who has the most policies, because you would not be able to cover the risk if there was a significant, widespread attack. I know in the cybersecurity strategy that you put out, you do conceive or at least contemplate, a TRIA-like system. And I just wanted to know if you could just speak more to cyber insurance, and particularly I'm thinking of, the giants. They're gonna figure it out, and they're gonna have some of the best left of boom defenses. I really do worry though about the SMEs, the small and medium-sized businesses who you have described as target-rich, cyber poor. So could you just wrap up here with my final minute just to speak to cyber insurance?
Yeah, absolutely. And as you know, we are doing this study based on the National Cybersecurity Strategy. I think the difficulty kind of goes back to the fact that we do not have a comprehensive view of the landscape, because heretofore we don't have that legislation, or we don't have that implementation on CISA. I think that hinders cyber insurance companies from being able to price insurance policies if you don't understand what your baseline is for cyber incidents and attacks. It's also, some of the discussion on, I think Lloyd's made the decision that they exclude state actors. They exclude policies from state actors, the war exception, which would make it difficult if you connect like NotPetya and state-sponsored criminals. So it's a space that I think will benefit from a better understanding of the ecosystem, and I think a robust sort of TRIA-like study. I welcome that work to come, but it's also something I'd love to dig more deeply into, especially because you've got Cowbell in your district, and we have talked to them before.
Great, thank you, and yield back.
Thank you. The gentleman yields back. I almost made a cowbell question. I've joked, but I didn't know. And I love the idea on cyber insurance. I think even though we don't have direct oversight here, I do sit also on the Financial Services Committee, the Insurance Subcommittee. So if we could somehow work out a hearing on that, I think it'd be great. But I want to thank Director Easterly for the valuable testimony and the members for their great questions today. The members of the subcommittee may have some additional questions. I know I do for you, and we would ask the witness to please respond to these in writing. Pursuant to Committee Rule 7D, the hearing record will be held open for 10 days. Without objection, the subcommittee stands adjourned.
Thank you, sir.
A Russian man claiming to hold top-level secrets about Russian advanced bombers has just turned up at the U.S. southern border, seeking asylum. The man claims to have been an engineer at a production facility over in the city of Kazan, and he says that he possesses top-secret information about the White Swan Tu-160, which is the most advanced bomber in the Russian arsenal. U.S. border officials, they interviewed the man, and they determined that his story was in fact credible and eventually passed him off to the FBI, who are still in the process of interrogating him right now. However, analysts have pointed out that the fact that the story was even leaked to the public is an indication that perhaps the American government is encouraging other Russians who also hold top-level secrets to also escape to America. And if you thought that was interesting, well then you should click on that button below this video and check out Epic TV, one of the best no-censorship video platforms on the internet.